Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And yeah, today we're going to be running through our personal ABM story. And this is a story of how Strategic ABM and BlueBotics built out an ABM strategy from scratch. And it was an ABM strategy that has allowed us to build out a pipeline of over £4 million in opportunities. I would love to hand over to Matt to just give a bit of an introduction to BlueBotics and who BlueBotics are.
Sure, yeah, we're a Swiss company. We've been around 20 years and we do autonomous navigation technology, not for Teslas, for industrial vehicles. So we work with companies like Toyota Forklift or ABB, and we help them automate either manual vehicles or new mobile robots from scratch. And you can think of our ANT navigation like Intel inside a PC. It's the brains of what makes that autonomous vehicle work. I joined the company at the end of 2019, and I was basically the first full-time marketing hire in a company of what was then 30 people. The other marketing function existing was sales team doing visits and shows, and I think about 30% of an admin manager's time because they knew some graphic design. But the company had investment just the end of the year before, so they were looking to grow. They were trying to put the right teams in place, and that's kind of where we started. So me, myself, just my background, I was a technology journalist turned marketer when I moved to Switzerland in 2008, because it's hard to be a journalist when you don't speak the language. And since then, I've been working always in B2B marketing in technology companies, so hearing technology, commercial drones, and now industrial automation, and we're effectively a software company.
And so we're going to run through some of the challenges that we experienced in setting up this ABM program, and we're also going to run through some lessons as a result of that. So, I mean, first of all, Matt, when you joined BlueBotics, what was the kind of, the challenge that you saw, one of the first challenges you saw around brand awareness? What was the kind of the state of play when you joined the company?
When I joined, we had brand awareness if you knew us. If you knew us, you knew us. If you didn't, you didn't. And industry-wide, I would say it was varied, the brand awareness. There was definitely room for improvement. And even among people that did know that BlueBotics existed, it wasn't always to 100% of them clear exactly what we did, because the messaging was somewhat complicated, and we'll go into that a bit afterwards, but based on our history and a changing business model. So the business, how we work with vehicle makers is we try to partner with them usually on a pilot project. So we work with them on a new vehicle and we help them develop that from the ground up. So our lead time to getting that signature can be months, even years. And that project itself can take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. So obviously the bigger vehicle makers, the better. And arriving at BlueBotics, I already had the idea of ABM type targeted marketing in my head. And so while I was there in the first 6 months, I was obviously learning the business, talking to customers, but at the same time researching ABM and trying to learn how I should do that. And researching that was what got me to the best ebook I found at the time by these guys, which led me to eventually speaking to the team once I knew enough to be dangerous. From there, I met Jack.
Yeah, and so when we first started working with Matt and the team at BlueBotics, it was about end of 2019, and Matt had obviously been in the company for a few months at that point. He'd identified ABM as the kind of go-to-market strategy that he wanted to employ, and we kind of saw a few, real positives that we could work with and look to build on when it came to the marketing strategy, the ABM programs that we wanted to build. But we also had to make sure that we had a set of kind of clear foundations and clear kind of principles in place before we kind of dived into that program. And I think you probably heard earlier in some of the talks about that kind of need for planning, a real kind of strong planning phase, which is something that potentially a lot of companies, a lot of marketers trying to do ABM don't think about enough. There needs to be that kind of concerted planning phase in those early stages. So from our perspective, it was looking at the kind of tech stack. What did the BlueBotics have in place when we first started? Things like the CRM, the marketing automation, the intent data platforms. That was all the sort of thing that we had to set up. Likewise, from a content perspective, did we need to create some new content? Did we need to work with them on building out what kind of content we could use for the ABM program? So identifying those kind of gaps in those early stages, that's where we kind of had to focus our attention on our energy in that first few months. And I think, what that meant was we had to be kind of realistic about the goals that we set for those first few months. I think it would be really, really easy as an agency partner to kind of come in and say that we can get these quick wins for you, you can transform your marketing and all of that. But the reality is we had to be realistic about what was achievable in those early stages. And ultimately, our goal in that first sort of 3 to 6 months with Matt and the team was building out the foundations for a program that would be long lasting and serve us for the foreseeable, not something that would just be a kind of quick scheme or program. So ultimately, the kind of key takeaway here is really be clear about what is achievable within the time frame that you're looking to achieve things, and be realistic about how you can actually get there.
Yeah, what I would add there is that as the only marketer in the company, I was pretty much grinding at that stage, just trying to learn, trying to put the basics in place. And what was, I think, nice timing about bringing on the ABM program was that these guys were my team before I had a team. So we could grind quicker up to having a level where we had enough knowledge that we could start building out content, both for ABM and content marketing in general. So that was a useful amplification at that stage.
Absolutely. And I think, on that point around content, one of the other kind of key challenges that we identified and we could see when we started working together was around messaging and potentially a kind of lack of, clarity on the messaging. So maybe you can detail that a little bit.
Yeah, so the company started in 2001, and for the first few years, we were really doing a lot of mobile robotics projects, meaning we were developing mobile robots for different companies. A lot of prototyping. So we did a mobile coffee machine robot for Nespresso. We did an airport reception robot for KLM. Lots of individual projects, which kind of kept the company bubbling along. But it was a few years in that the company pivoted once the leadership team it was clear to them that actually the IP was the navigation, and that could be applied to all kinds of different vehicles. So the company kind of pivoted around that business model instead. And from then, I think it was 2009, the first customer vehicle with our Ant box inside went into operation, and then it's been incremental growth, kind of in line with the automation industry since then. The messaging was a little bit complex, and there are a few reasons for that. So one was it still reflected that original mobile robots as a service kind of theme, and with some navigation added on top, but the result was not always clear. Also, we're an engineering company, so the leadership is largely engineers, Swiss engineers, so English is a second language. I mean, their English is amazing, better than any of my languages, but that still adds another element of potential confusion. So we really needed to dig in there and start from scratch. And in the end, the approach we went with was kind of, I don't know if you know story brand, so like a hero's journey kind of approach. And it's a little bit simple, but the idea of that was to really stop just talking about BlueBotics and what we do and put the customer at the center of the messaging. And I think you can see that like on our homepage today. If you scroll, you're gonna go through their challenge and how we can help them solve it. And that really fitted with what is, for us at the pilot project stage, a really strong part of it is our support offer and how closely we work with them. So that all needed to be put in place. And that enabled us to have something to start ABM with and to have something to start more widely content marketing in general.
Yeah, and I think, what we kind of saw with that stage with BlueBotics was that we needed to be really clear about the messaging. Matt had done a lot of great work on that in the first few months that he'd been there. When he then sort of brought us on board, it was about really thinking about the messaging from a perspective of that kind of segmented audience, the different industries that we were going after, the different job titles and personas, and the different buyer stages. We've seen that earlier about those kind of different levels of the journey, where people are at in that buying journey. And there's different messages that we want to communicate at those points, and being really clear about what those messages were and how we wanted to communicate them was absolutely essential, and we really had to all agree on that. And when I say all, I mean the whole business. And again, you've heard a lot about alignment across organisations today. That is something that is, I think, probably one of the most fundamental aspects of how we got to where we got to with this programme, was having that alignment, not just in marketing, not just between marketing and sales, but from the whole kind of business. And when it came to the messaging, it was about being able to communicate that messaging to the right, at the right time to the right people throughout the business. So from, when it came to conversations with the engineers, the product managers, the marketing team, the sales team, everyone in the business was kind of pulling in the same direction. There was a focus there and a clarity. So that, I think, was something that was super important. And if you think about, how we kind of approach this segmentation aspect, the messaging is going to be so different depending on who we're targeting. There are companies that we're targeting that were, established kind of brand leaders, forklift manufacturers that have been in business for 50 years, that kind of thing, who really didn't need us to kind of teach them all the details. They have the technical knowledge. It's more about, really just kind of speaking to them on their level, versus, for example, a brand new, mobile robot startup who is new to the industry, doesn't necessarily have that technical knowledge and know-how, so needs a bit more of the explanation, the educational kind of messaging. So having that really clear, and then making sure that everyone in the business was reflecting that in the way that they were communicating with prospects and clients was super important.
Yeah, I think I would say that, just as an example, like that segmented messaging, developing the core messaging, but then getting it segmented for the different types of customer. I think in most of those workshops we had all 4 of our VPs and the CEO in every single one of those, because that work hadn't at that level been done before. So they needed to be on board from day one of how we talked about the company, because in a few months that was going to be their new website, and it was going to be in their face every day. So yeah, it was at the highest level within our small company.
And so there was one kind of final challenge that we'll talk about today, which is around relationships. And I think, particularly in those early stages, it was an issue that was identified, or a challenge that was identified around the depth of relationships that BlueBotics had with target accounts and the audience we're going after. Maybe you can go into a bit of detail on that.
Yeah, I mean, our go-to-market had been pretty much, let's say, traditional and sales-led. So lots of trade shows, and our contacts within accounts were typically with 1 or 2 people on their side and our side. I was amazed. Some of them were amazingly deep. We had amazing knowledge and still do of those customer accounts. But then you would have a lot of others where it was fairly narrow, fairly sparse, maybe out of date. So there was really a big opportunity to deepen the level of those relationships and to broaden them within the accounts, so that they weren't just reliant on a single contact at our side and at the customer side. Because you never know whether that contact is an influencer, decision maker, where they are. If they leave the company, obviously that entire relationship dies. So that was definitely part of our thinking with the ABM program, was to broaden that and to deepen that at an account level.
And I think what that kind of led into for us was really trying to think about how we wanted to speak to those different kind of audiences, and think about what types of channels, tactics, strategies we needed to employ to speak to those different levels of relationships. Some of these relationships, as Matt says, were kind of single point, very, maybe good relationships, but just with the one person in the account. Some of these relationships were, spread more widely across the account, and some of them, were non-existent. There weren't relationships there. So kind of analysing where that relationship level was at with the accounts that we were going after was really, really important. And what that meant was we could then build out different content assets, different experiences per account that could essentially speak to those people at the level that they were at. So for some accounts, it was a case of building that awareness. We didn't have awareness with them at all. They didn't know who BlueBotics were. They weren't sure of the proposition or the pain point that BlueBotics solved. And so it was a case of building out awareness type activity. We used a mix of tactics and channels for that, programmatic advertising based on intent data. We used hub pages and LinkedIn advertising and all sorts of kind of tactics at that brand awareness level. We then, for other accounts, had to kind of think about more of an in-depth approach, something that was more educational, more kind of focused on their specific pain points, their needs, and kind of bringing them a bit further along in that journey. So more like educational content with a lot of resources involved there. So we built out some kind of landing pages and interactive experiences for that, and kind of shared those, whether that was on email or through social selling or all of these kind of different tactics and channels, bringing the sales team into it as well. And this is kind of the point where the sales team really had to get actively involved in the actual kind of process of marketing and selling. Was at that point we wanted to start pushing them towards conversations and meetings with people, you know, either face to face or virtually. So making sure that the sales team were happy to kind of take on those relationships and not so much hand it over, but work with them in collaboration. And then finally, you know, we have a kind of phase where by the point at which an account is much more developed, there's a relationship there. Potentially it's about just kind of restarting a conversation or just moving that conversation a little bit further on. So that might be with something like a kind of direct mail asset, or it might be a sales enablement type playbook or something like that allows the sales team to kind of move that conversation towards a kind of buying decision. So having these different stages of content creation, channels, tactics, and the strategy, the overall strategies, meant that we were able to talk to different accounts at different points in their journey, rather than just going after like a single type of account at one point in time.
I think on that sales buy-in, I would just make the point that with the head of sales who'd been there for 4 years when I arrived, what seemed to work quite well was during those first few months after kind of building that relationship with him and downloading the ebook and learning that, one conversation early on was literally saying to him, if you only do one thing for marketing these 6 months, can you read this please and tell me what you think? And that, you know, you get them to the last page of that type of material or that type of education, and that really made a big difference with him. He was brought into the program from then on.
Absolutely. And so with all of that in mind, this was where we've kind of got to at the moment, the results that we've managed to generate from this activity. And it's a real kind of mix of different types of activity that we've run. We've run a mix of one-to-many programs, one-to-few programs. And in terms of where we've got to, we've actually generated 16 opportunities, some of which are closed won, some of which are still ongoing, from the mix of those two programs. So some have come through from a one-to-many program, some have come from the one-to-fews that we've run. And this has essentially allowed us to kind of build out a really, really, you know, positive looking pipeline. There's some really good clients that are coming through, you know, big brand names as well. But we've also managed to kind of deepen that relationship within a lot of accounts. So if they're not at the point at which they've closed yet, or they're not at the point of being an opportunity, we've widened our level of awareness and reputation within those accounts through, you know, huge numbers of impressions across various ad campaigns, lots of clicks and interaction with our content and our activities. You know, we've built relationships, connections, and conversations started. So it's all kind of building towards, you know, a long-standing kind of foundation for future work. It's not about this kind of isolated approach of one campaign and done. It's building a real strong foundation for future campaigns that we run. And Matt, maybe you can talk a bit about what that's meant in terms of the business opportunities and the revenue side.
Sure, yeah. I think those opportunities are really a mix of brand new opportunities from companies that we had no link with before, and influencing existing relationships. We've seen that across the board, a good mix of those. And I think as you said, Jack, I think if we stopped everything right now, we would really shoot ourselves in the foot. I really kind of see where we are today as the seed, if you like, or the starting point. Particularly, if you look at the wider context of where we are as a business, the let's say warehouse automation or the mobile robotics market is like incremental growth and fast growth over the next 10 years, particularly following COVID. That's even more of a focus than before, building a resilient business and not being able to find workers to do the kind of menial tasks. So with that in mind, I mean, I think we're well placed now, and we've started basically from our side, learning how to become more well placed. But if you think about, I know a lot of companies are bigger and more advanced and can nail down on things like customer lifetime value as far as being able to analyze these kind of numbers. For us to calculate something like CLV is almost impossible. The reason is that if you're a vehicle maker and you make manual vehicles, maybe your Volvo trucks or Caterpillar or something, you can release a model and you plan that we're going to build 10,000 of these every year for the next 3 years. For our customer base and pretty much or our competitors as well. In this space, in the automation market, most of the customer deals with end customers are project basis. So it might be a warehouse takes 10 automated forklifts, or a manufacturing plant has 50 mini robots. So in terms of predicting that growth year to year is very difficult, because most of the vehicle makers on the automated side, they're not mass producing yet. So that makes it maybe a little bit tricky to put these kind of figures in a global context and in terms of predictions. But with the industry set to grow as it is, I think it's a great starting point.
Yeah, and I think, ultimately the lesson from this success that we have had, that we're going to continue to build on, is taking that multi-channel approach is so essential for ABM, but not even just a multi-channel approach, but a multi-discipline approach, a multi-program approach is really important. Ultimately, 95% or so of the market aren't necessarily going to be ready to buy at a given time. And that means that if we're trying to just target that 5% who are in market, who are ready to buy, you're really limiting your scope. You're limiting what you're actually going to be able to achieve. And when it comes to the point that you've kind of hit that threshold, you're then kind of stuck. What we've been trying to do is build out a program that allows us to lay those foundations, as I say, with all of the accounts that we're trying to go after in the market, whether they're in the market for the services right now or in the future, starting to build that trust, starting to educate them on the pain points that BlueBotics solves and how it solves them. And so that when, in however many months or years they are ready to make that buying decision, they think of BlueBotics first of all. They see BlueBotics as the thought leader and top of the industry. And that's where we really wanted to get BlueBotics to, because ultimately that then puts us in a position where people are coming to us. We're building that kind of, it's not a program, but it's a way of actually kind of going to market and way of actually doing business, which I think is so important. So, we were really, really keen on not just kind of identifying little kind of quick wins and channels and tactics that we could kind of win, in the short term, but do something that would set us up for long-term success. And so this is the kind of summary of the lessons. I mean, from our perspective, these are the real things that we would suggest, thinking about on a daily basis in that first, it's certainly in those setup phases of an ABM program, being clear about what where you are and what goals you can actually achieve within a certain time frame, not over, trying to get to a point too quickly, being really realistic about that, being clear about the message, not just overall for your business, but to specific segments and specific markets and specific personas as well. And then taking that multi-channel, multi-layered, multi-program approach and the long-term thinking that leads to. And what that's meant from our perspective with BlueBotics in terms of how the programs have evolved, we started working with them in 2019, and we then developed a one-to-many program to start with, which was kind of like a sort of testing ground for the messaging, the content, the audience that we were going after. We got some results coming through from that, but we're just starting to build that awareness and get BlueBotics in front of the right people. And then, we started developing out one-to-few programs, slightly more targeted programs with a specific cluster. And as that's progressed, we've built more one-to-few programs or iterated on the existing ones. And we're now at the point where we're actually building out a whole another one-to-many program with a totally different audience, completely different market segment. And Matt, maybe you can kind of talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, so we've kind of kicked off a new, like a joint marketing and biz dev project or stream of the business in the last few months. Traditionally we were trying to work with the vehicle OEMs and do pilot projects, and that's great, but you never really know how successful a vehicle is going to be, and there's a big time between starting working with them and that going to market. So it became obvious for us that really to scale effectively and to scale as quickly as we could, obviously the more vehicles they can sell with our tech inside, the better for us. And a lot of our customers, you have basically two types, if you like. The big manufacturers of manual vehicles, and for them the automated stuff is still a tiny percentage, or smaller startups doing mobile robots and things where they maybe don't have a big marketing team. So we saw a real gap there for an educational piece targeted at end users, to really, a bit of a pull strategy really, to educate them on these types of vehicles, how the navigation works, how basically introduce them to the ecosystem of our customer vehicles. So with that in mind, we launched what's called antdriven.com, so a second website targeted purely at end users. Very much a content marketing play, but highlighting those vehicles, highlighting how they can work together interoperably based on our platform, which is super important for some huge global end users. And really the aim being there to grow awareness of those vehicles, but also right through to generating specific leads that we can pass through to our vehicle maker customers. So with those two things in mind, we're trying to cover each side of the coin, really.
Absolutely. So
yeah, just to answer your point, sorry.
Yeah.
So the one-to-many, the new one-to-many is very much based around that. It's building awareness of driving traffic to that site, building awareness of customer vehicles among that end user space. So that, we're not just talking to the vehicle makers, we're jumping ahead of that to try and drive interest in the vehicle makers that already have products on the market.
Absolutely. So to sum it up, what would you say would be the biggest lesson that you've learned working on the ABM program for your ABM story?
In our experience, like if I had to talk to somebody where I was in 2019, I would kind of highlight how much dedication they need to the cause, really. I'm sure we've all read that it's a marathon and not a sprint. We're a small company with limited resources, limited team. So buy-in was super important from everyone early on, not just sales and marketing, but leadership, which includes lots of engineers. So the moment you put it into metrics and numbers, you start to get further with your argumentation. I would say something from the first two sessions this morning about ABM not being a holy grail or a magic pill. I found that it's almost a danger to just bring in ABM as this magic term. The danger is that it's latched onto as something that's going to double sales in 6 months. I think when I've talked about it internally as being more targeted marketing at specific accounts that we want to work with, when you put it in that context and back that up with explaining how, just like any other marketing, you need to have brand awareness and then work customers down the funnel, that seems to create more of a bit more patience and longer term thinking than some new magic thing that's going to do wonders. So I think all part of managing expectations, but that was, I think, being a useful tactic. And starting again, I would definitely take that approach and kind of keep ABM as the magic word in the background.
Good stuff. So that's everything from us. Thank you very much for your time. This is our personal ABM journey. If you'd like to tell us your personal ABM story, we are at stand 8 out in the main hall, and you can actually win a trip to Paris. Amazingly, if you
I saw that.
yeah,
Amazing.
if you come and tell us your story.
Just a huge thank you to both of you. I mean, there's questions flooded in, and I know some people are desperate to take a break, but I just want to say one thing, particularly sharing the personal story, making it seem very easy with those steps. But one person, how big's the team now? Your marketing team?
My marketing team is me and almost 4 people.
Which, congratulations. And I think you demonstrated both by being on stage together and telling the story so well, in clear partnership, and I love the fact you related your agency and called them your team. And I think that's a great tip for anybody wanting to start out. Any burning questions? Because I've got so many, but we've got so little time. Right, just down at the front.
Very good question. What was your budget initially when you walked into the company and you engaged the agency? And how many hours a day did you work for how long?
My goodness. So did everybody hear that? How big was the budget and just how many hours?
We're in the low hundreds of thousands in terms of the budget. How many hours on ABM specifically? That's hard to say because it was kind of almost the same work as the messaging development. Because so much of those first few months was working on that, it was kind of one of the same. So when I wasn't working on that alone, if you like, with our team and the different departments, I was working on that with Jack's team. So it was kind of pretty much the majority, I would say.
And we got a question from, I think, towards the back. Did I make that up? Yeah, sorry, in the middle. Thank you.
I was just interested, when you talk about the content strategy, it's quite a detailed question. We're hearing a lot about buyers changing their approach, nobody wants to give their data. Do you have a good kind of best practice for when we should be employing like data capture, forms, and gating versus actually no forms at all and relying on the websites?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I would say the majority of the programs that we've run, we haven't really used forms at all. I think there might have been a couple in the early stages with the one-to-many where we wanted to get some of that lead data, essentially. But, you know, the nice thing about working with BlueBotics was that there was the sales-led element of it was something that meant that there were a lot of relationships that we could all, you know, start working with. So it wasn't like we needed to completely start, you know, from nothing. But I think that ultimately the way that things are going, if you're going to be going down the route of formed, gated content, it has to be something that's so valuable to the person that you're targeting that, you know, it's going to rely on a lot of work, a lot of hours to actually get that up and running. And I think you've got to ask yourself whether it's worth that in terms of the output versus the reward of doing that. Alternatively, the other option being not having things gated, building that kind of real, you know, essentially a real kind of bank of thought leadership content and positioning yourself strongly in the market that way.
Yeah,
Can I add
and a comment.
One point to that, which is it depends who your customer is and where they are.
Yeah.
Like if you're targeting customers only in the US, I would be less concerned about it. But it's the same as trade shows. They'll come up in the US and go, scan me.
Yeah.
But if you ask a German at a trade show to scan them, it's a different thing.
Yeah.
So it a little bit plays to like data sensitivity of the customer.
That's great advice. And I think one tip I'd say in terms of, you know, classic direct marketing test, you get the answers that way. Lots more information on gated forms versus ungated within Propolis community. So if you're not familiar with that, loads of assets to download. I must ask one question from the digital stream because it's very unfair. Those are sat at home or wherever they are in the world and their question doesn't get asked. And I'm going to pick, Kate Williams asks, did the approach decrease your sales time to conversion? Did you shorten the sales journey?
That is a good question. That would be easier to answer if our CRM stack was different.
The fact you can't answer it is an answer in itself.
Anecdotally, I would expect so, but I can't give you hard data on that.
A huge thank you again. Questions perhaps over lunch, so huge thank you.